Percivall Willughby absolutely despised the midwives of his time. In his 1670s book, Observations in Midwifery, he intended to inform the ignorant common midwives, whose brutal methods were responsible for so many deaths, according to him. Although his book wasn't published until almost 2 centuries later, Willughby was writing in a period in which male practitioners were gradually taking over the role of midwives in Britain, or at least trying to. Many of his contemporaries wrote similar accounts, no doubt motivated by asserting their claim on the medical marketplace, although Willughby's writing is particularly striking. So, according to him, midwives will pull, stretch, or hale the mother's bodies, or use any violence to enforce the womb in hopes of a speedier delivery. Such strugglings and doings make it difficult, painful, and long labor. But was any of that true? What made a 17th century midwife good at her job? And can we trust men like Willughby? Hello, lovely history fans. I'm Dr. Julia Martins and I'm a historian of gender and medicine. I study how the body was understood in the past and how that shapes the present. So let's dive into the world of early modern midwives. And if you'd like to support me and my channel, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. So, until fairly recently, most people did believe the negative accounts by male midwives. Traditional midwives were depicted as stereotypically ignorant, poor, superstitious, and unskilled. Perhaps the main reason for that is that the first historians of midwifery in Britain were physicians and not trained historians, who tended to take male medical practitioners of the past, such as Willughby, at their word. And this, of course, also reflected the biases of these 19th century writers who struggled to see women, whether in the past or in the present, as skilled and capable of what they considered male activities, such as medicine. Fortunately, though, social historians have spent decades deconstructing this stereotype, thanks to a wealth of primary sources, including records kept by the midwives themselves, their clients, and the licensing authorities. So, what made a 17th century midwife good at her job? Perhaps the best way to answer this question is to look at how midwives were licensed, which at the time was the responsibility of the Church of England. So midwives swore oaths, which often included making their services available to both rich and poor women, who they often attended for free, reporting information on the father of the baby and suspected bastardy, not engaging in witchcraft, baptizing infants who probably wouldn't survive, notifying the ecclesiastical authorities of any baptisms performed, not switching babies, which, great, not procuring abortions, maintaining patient confidentiality, not using instruments or mutilating babies in the womb, making sure that stillborn babies were buried properly and the placenta as well after birth, cooperating with other midwives and instructing their deputies, their apprentices, reporting midwives who didn't conform to these guidelines, and many other things. This list is not comprehensive. So as you can see, these injunctions, they have much to do with professional ethics, both from a medical and a religious perspective, but they also highlight the importance of helping fellow midwives, of cooperating in difficult deliveries, as well as instructing the new generations of midwives. So midwives should be of good character and practicing Christians, active in their communities and parishes. Still, you might be thinking that none of these criteria, none of it seems to take skill into consideration. In 17th century Britain, most midwives practiced for long periods of time before obtaining their licenses. They usually started out as a deputy to an older, more senior midwife in order to gain experience. They attended deliveries and helped their mentors for years before working on their own, with these informal apprenticeships lasting from anywhere from 4 to 10 years. So when midwives applied for their licenses, it wasn't unusual for them to have decades of experience, especially since the licensing process was so expensive, and so they might need time to save for their application fees. Besides gaining experience, though, through practice, midwives were usually married women or widows, often with children themselves, which only added to this empirical bodily knowledge about childbirth and female health that they had accumulated. What is perhaps most telling about these midwives and their careers was the way their clients spoke about them. Because you see, besides being a good Christian and swearing to their oaths and undergoing all these informal apprenticeships, midwives were expected at their licensing to give evidence of their skill, which normally involved their clients testifying in their favor. Many women would come forth and praise their midwives to the licensing authorities, sometimes dozens of women, describing how many times they had been delivered and how capable the midwife was. Of course, the higher these clients were on the social scale, say a gentlewoman, the more these testimonies would weigh in the midwife's favor. They might include passages like these found in the archives. She, the midwife, is not only helpful to the rich and those that can pay her, but also to the poor. She, the midwife, had the blessing to be a means for the safe delivery of others, whose names are here subscribed, and many others. She, the midwife, has good skill, experience, and success in midwifery, and has safely delivered several women in childbed with good success. So, what made a 17th century midwife good was a mix of their character, skill, piety, ethics, and involvement in their communities. Although the licensing system wasn't perfect by any means, it ensured standards of good conduct and practice, and it confirmed practical skills through clients' testimonies, and legitimized deputy midwives' apprenticeships. Midwives were usually well known and respected in their local communities by people of all social groups. And besides their clients' accounts of their skill, midwives were often called to testify as experts in early modern courts, such as in the case of women pleading the belly, so declaring that they were pregnant to avoid execution. And I'll add some references below, including about the jury of matrons, which is very interesting. But midwives would also testify in bastardy cases or when someone was accused of rape, which indicates how they were perceived by their communities as medical experts, especially where the female body was concerned. Besides that, as midwives started to publish midwifery manuals, in no small measure to assert their authority over the world of pregnancy and childbirth, which they perceived as increasingly threatened by these male practitioners, some midwives became widely known. They became celebrities. That's the case of Jane Sharp, the best-selling yet, still mysterious English author, and Louise Bourgeois, or Louise Boursier, who was a French royal midwife. In their writings, we get a glimpse of an early modern midwife's life. They were aware of their responsibilities and committed to caring for women as part of a sisterhood and a community. Despite what men midwives like Percivall Willughby wrote, 17th century midwives were usually very skilled and experienced, and hundreds of testimonies, letters, and journals tell us that, including some accounts by physicians themselves. Most midwives followed an informal apprenticeship, and this all-female network allowed them to cooperate and learn from each other. It wasn't rare, for instance, for a midwife to call a colleague to help in a complicated delivery. This wasn't seen as a failure, but rather how a midwife should proceed, how she was expected to act. And midwives, besides that, they weren't poor, ignorant, and dangerous practitioners. Rather, they were known for their patience, their skill, kindness, and crucially for their knowledge, which derived from practical experience, not book learning. Yet, it's telling that this negative stereotype of midwives as ignorant and unskilled practitioners persisted. So with the medicalization of childbirth and the rise of male midwives and their tools, such as forceps, traditional midwives were gradually replaced, and male practitioners were eager to cement their own role. And that, in a way, made them very quick to decry the midwives. And that's a complex topic in itself, which I'll probably make a video about very soon. But anyway, as for Victorian physicians interested in the history of medicine, they believed their predecessors' accounts. They didn't question how capable midwives actually were, and whether men midwives might have had an economic interest in degrading them. So as a historian, it's difficult to ignore the enormous evidence, the mounting evidence of 17th century midwives' skill and professionalism. Also, personally, having met midwives and been safely delivered by one myself, it seems hard to believe their depiction as violent and brutal people, even though I know that things are different in the 21st and 17th centuries. Anyway, lastly, and ironically, it's likely that much of Willoughby's knowledge about childbirth, as well as many other men midwives of the time, came directly from the midwives that they were so disparaging in their writings, who often had instructed them, such as Willoughby's own daughter, who was herself a midwife. But that's a matter for another video. So let me know in the comments if you've ever come across these negative stereotypes about midwives of the past, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing to the channel to hear all about how people in the past lived. Thank you.